We had a patch with the number of balance changes. We had a new card release. That means it's time for an updated best decks video here for Marvel Snap. I feel I would be remiss if I didn't start this week's video by talking about the tier 0 deck in the room, in my opinion, Thanos. I call this Thanos deck tier 0 because in the year plus that I've been spending poring over data on untapped.gg, I have never before seen a deck with the incredible play rate that this deck has logged among untapped users simultaneously have one of the highest win rates and the highest cube rate over a sample size in the thousands of games. If you look at all of the matches on Untapped post Infinite at the time of my recording this video, about 16% of players in that sample are playing some variation of this Thanos deck. If you look at just the top 10% of players inside of Infinite, the tippy top of the ladder, over 25% of them have been playing this Thanos deck. This deck, despite getting Lockjaw nerfed to no longer playing that and Timestone getting side graded, has still grown more and more powerful over recent weeks with a number of powerful additions. Call Obsidian, more recently Hope Summers, and then Mockingbird this week were all meaningful power level increases to what this deck is doing. In fact, I think you could make the reasonable argument that the recent Timestone change actually made this deck stronger in a number of situations. I say that because the Timestone change now encourages you to just play Timestone out as quickly as possible on curve, which makes it better with Mockingbird and makes it easier to sequence your energy out consistently over turns. This deck still, even without Lockjaw and the acceleration from Timestone, now has Hope Summers and often this inclusion of Psylocke to be able to accelerate into these 5 and 6 energy plays at a time. This deck list is very good at getting set up on board with stats early and then blowing away the opponent's final play with Alioth or heavily disrupting whatever they're looking to do with either Mobius or Shang-Chi, cleaning things up at the end of the game. While there are a handful of decks that we're going to cover here in a minute that can feel somewhat competitive into this Thanos deck, I truly don't think anything is strictly favored over a large sample size at the moment. Unlike a lot of decks in Marvel Snap, there isn't a single tech card or group of tech cards that really give you a strong matchup into Thanos. It's just hitting on so many different axes that there isn't a single piece of interaction or Achilles heel that you can really leverage or abuse to get out ahead of it. It's definitely the best deck in Marvel Snap right now, and if you're just trying to win, you should definitely be playing something close to these 12 cards. Before I move on to our next deck, I would also like to point out that while the category for this deck says most popular, there actually isn't going to be a top performing decks category in this week's best deck roundup, and the reason for this is really straightforward. The metagame right now is narrow in part because the two most popular decks, this Thanos deck and then the discard collector deck that we're going to cover next, are currently the two top performing decks in the metagame. That's why I refer to this as a tier 0 metagame, because when the most popular decks are also the best performing decks, that's basically the biggest sign you can get that there isn't a fantastic way or tools in the format to let other things chip away at these titans. Our second deck that is maybe not quite tier 0 like Thanos, but certainly tier 1 is just the discard collector deck. This deck isn't only the second most popular, but it has the second highest performance metrics right behind Thanos. This deck list got a buff in the most recent patch from Meek, giving you control over where you can end up at. And I think this deck has a lot of staying power into Thanos specifically, allowing it to be the number 2 in the format because it's able to get a lot of these cheap cards down on the board early that grow in a way that typically doesn't expose them to Shang-Chi, and in a way that often allows you to retain priority, so that way you're not susceptible to Alioth in the final turns of the game. Moving along for the big dogs of the format, we've got a few sweet high potential lists that have good stats and albeit much smaller sample sizes on Untapped that might be able to shine a happy light through this tier 0 format. Kicking things off in the high potential category, we have Hope Summers powered Silver Surfer. I truly think Marvel Snap's latest season pass release and Hope Summers was a missing piece to the Silver Surfer puzzle. This archetype was always looking for a way to fit more 3 energy cards into its curve without giving something up to do so. Sarah was always a card they looked to in the past that felt awkward in a number of spots and now has counterplay with Mobius and Mobius, and Hope just fills in really organically, being a 3 energy card for Silver Surfer, while also letting you play 2 3 energy cards on turn 5, and then either 2 3 energy cards on turn 6, or a 3 plus a 4, either Surfer plus Wong or Surfer plus Absorbing Man, to give you this big flourish at the end of the game. I think our 3 energy cards that are disruptive right now are quite powerful. Mobius and Mobius is disrupting people's Mockingbirds. Thanos decks are kind of moving away from playing Kairia, since Lockjaw is no longer a thing, letting Killmonger be a card that can interact with a lot of different things that they have going on. And Hope Summer is letting you consistently double up your Surfer activations in different ways. Lets this deck go taller than it previously was able to do, giving you a lot more raw power output range than it had in the past. Our next high potential deck list this week is a unique take on movement, featuring not only Hercules and Spider-Man 2099, but also Negasonic Teenage Warhead as a proactive disruptive piece. In addition to having reasonable stats and a smaller sample size on Untapped, this deck list also top 8 at a recent community run tournament that had over 30% of the players playing Thanos inside of it. I'm somewhat skeptical that this deck could have staying power, but the numbers are there, and it's definitely something that I personally am going to be looking to try out at some point in the not too distant future to see what this bad boy is capable of. To my Jeff's picks, we have some sweet deck lists that I personally have been weathering this Thanos storm with, starting with a Moon Girl She-Hulk Mockingbird brew that just does everything I love doing in Marvel Snap. We have Shauna as well as Mysterio, who can make Mockingbird a 2/9 all on their own. And when you mix in a Hood from Demon or Nico Minoru transforming someone, this deck list very quickly is able to slam down multiple 9 and 10 power things on the last turn of the game for just single points worth of energy. The deck list also gets to mix in a small amount of disruption, with Goose dictating where Thanos is able to play their big cards out, Iceman disrupting their curve, and Armor ensuring that whatever card we play out in the final turn of the game doesn't get blown away by Goliath in whatever lane it's in. My second Jeff's pick this week is a Clutter Mockingbird variation that looks to put the squeeze on Thanos in a couple of different ways. Starting off, we have the Man-Thing, who when deployed into a lane with lots of small things can provide up to 13 points worth of power for just 4 energy. Our Clutter package of Debris as well as Annihilus can lock the opponent out of valuable board space, especially when they're deploying their own Thanos stones to the board as well. Speaking of Debris and Annihilus, thanks to Man-Thing as well as our copy of Typhoid Mary, Annihilus can actually use his old mode to donate Debris' rocks across the opponent's side of the board as well in spots, doubling up on the clutter she can provide. Mockingbird in tandem with Sentry and that previously mentioned Typhoid Berry provide the big hits for this deck at the top end of the curve, letting us slam down stats once we locked our opponent up and out of their own gameplay. My next Jeff pick is leveraging freshly buffed Elsa, who once again gives bonuses to everything across the entire board. This Hitmonkey Thor deck is fantastic at filling up all 12 spots on the board, thus leveraging a full 9 points worth of stats from Elsa when she shows up. This deck list accomplishes this in a couple different ways. First, the Thor Beta Ray build Jane Foster curve ensures that we have a ton of 0 energy cards to play out, and then those 0 energy cards, when paired with Hitmonkey, Mysterio, and some 1-drops to boot, let us fill out every spot on that last turn, and making it simultaneously difficult for our opponent to predict exactly where our bonus stats are going to be ending up at. Armor is a really important utility card in this deck, not only for giving you a lane where you can duck a copy of Goliath, but also for protecting your copy of Thor or Beta Ray Bill from a Shang-Chi, since this deck is often going to have priority when it's playing out proactively in those early turns of the game. Finally, we close things out with the Kitty Collector deck, another favorite of mine that got a couple of buffs recently. Elsa Bloodstone is still phenomenal in this deck since it's so good at filling up all of its locations over the course of the game, and Hope Summers, our latest season pass card, has felt like a phenomenal upgrade to Zabu in this deck, giving us an additional way to generate more energy over the course of the game that's not restricted to simply playing out our 4 energy cards at a discount. This deck list has always been able to generate lots of cards, and it uses every bit of extra energy that Hope Summers gives us very consistently. If you haven't seen this deck list before, my number one piece of advice when piloting it is to remember that it is not a Loki deck. First, the primary engines in this deck are scaling Angela, Collector, and getting bonuses with Elsa, while Loki acts more of a break glass in case of emergency when you're in a matchup that's not good for you, or your hand's in an especially awkward spot and you'd like a reroll off of your opponent's deck. Well, I'm definitely still finding a handful of things that I can win games with and are interesting in this format. There's no denying the absolute power that the Thanos deck has with its recent additions, despite the couple of small nerfs it took around the edges. I'm going to be interested to see if Second Dinner gets proactively out in front of this in our upcoming OTA next week, or if we're going to have 3 more weeks of Mockingbird Thanos Winter before the next OTA eventually rolls around. I'd love to hear in the comments down below, does your experience match my own and what's indicated on Untapped? Is Thanos a force to be reckoned with that's popular, or is your pocket meta perhaps a little bit more diverse with players struggling to play the Mad Titan? As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed my musings on this topic, be sure to snap that like button. Hopefully, we'll see you back again real soon for some more Snap content here on YouTube.